Good morning, and welcome to yet another one of our podcasts. This is your boy, your men's life coach, Rolando. It's the XY Spark podcast, the podcast for men. Happy New Year to you wherever you are located around the planet. If you're in Australia, I know you probably celebrated your New Year 12 hours earlier than we did here in Canada. If you're in the States, if you're on Mountain Standard Time or Eastern Standard Time or Pacific Standard Time, we just want to say a happy New Year to you. And we are literally sitting in the first day of January 2025. This is definitely an exciting time. How is it going? Thank you for joining us right here again, one more time on the XY Spark podcast. We just want to say a strong shout out to you guys because here is what's happening. We are definitely appreciative for the support that you gave to us here on the podcast in the year 2024. So if you have been a follower, a subscriber, if you're someone who commented, if you were someone who were here consistently in our live podcast as we continue to normalize conversations about how we can seek to support more men, for us as men to be more empowered, for us as men to pay more attention to our mental health, for the ladies who are here to say to you as well, we value your participation and your feedback as we continue to empower more men to pay attention to their mental health. Guys, the reality is this is every other day or every single day that we turn on the radios, we hear crazy stories about the way that a person, a person's life was impacted negatively because of a decision that was made by a man who went out there and he might have decided to take justice in his own hands. He might have decided that, hey, life has thrown me too many boulders. So he decides to give up, he decides to quit, and he goes off into the community and does some really horrific things sometimes that ends up harming himself, harming other families. And we want to talk about how to win the battle against fear. How to win the battle against fear. I want to acknowledge all my live viewers. Hey, if you're joining us live here on TikTok, Happy New Year to you. I hope that the new year is going great. I would just like to know where you're joining us from. Shout out to you, okay? Shout out to you, Snowy. Shout out to you, Pierre. Taylor, shout out to you. I would just like you guys to type in the chat where you're joining our podcast from, and we'd like to just acknowledge where you're from and say, hey, shout out to you. And thank you for liking, thank you for sharing, thank you for being here with us on the podcast, the XY Spark podcast, where we continue to reiterate that men's mental health is not a myth. Okay, shout out to you. You're in Canada. Hey, I want to say shout out to all my Canada viewers. Thank you very much for being here, guys. How have you been paying attention to your mental health? What fear do you need to work on overcoming in the new year 2025? If you were to be brutally honest with yourself, are you able to reflect and recognize that, you know what, last year there were a lot of fears that were really preventing me from reaching my goals. There were a lot of things that I needed to do differently, but because the fear factor was so overwhelming for me, I never did the work that I needed to do. The fear crippled me. The fear prevented me, the fear interrupted my ability to be psychologically and mentally strong. What fear has have you faced in the past year? So we want to talk about how to win the battle against fear. And guys, let us establish one thing, that fear is definitely a psychological, it is a psychological battle. And learning how to manage or overcome fear is going to be one of those critical, and I want to say crucial spaces where, as men, as human beings, it's going to be one of the critical places where we're going to need to work on. So, what do you fear the most? Do you have a fear of failure? Do you have a fear of missing out? Right? Do you have a fear of not feeling like you are good enough or you're worthy enough? What fear do you find that you struggle with? Do you have a fear of not reaching your goals in the time that you have set out? You know, one of the things that we want to establish, guys, is this, is that according to psychology today, guys, they're saying about 60% of adults admits to having at least one unreasonable fear. 60%. Now, that's a huge number. So, if there are six of us here on the platform right now, you're talking about at least four of us who are struggling with fear. And that's a big number, right? So how do we help to to overcome these fears as we move forward? Because understanding, number one, what's going on, understanding what's causing us to feel fearful is going to help us to confront this fear and to move on ahead. Sometimes, guys, it's because of fear why we procrastinate, right? Yes, did you know that sometimes because we're fearful, we have something to do, but we keep, putting it off, putting it off, putting it off, and a part of that procrastination is rooted in fear, right? The fear of, not finishing the task. So we procrastinate, we hold back, and we want to really look at how do we overcome that fear. Your fear may be that, hey, I have a fear of insects. I have a fear, of spiders or snakes, or I have a fear of heights. And winning the battle against fear, guys, is really something that all of us have got to work on. Now, one of the things that we talk about in the field of psychotherapy is exposure therapy. Now, if you have a fear of insects, or let's say you were in an accident and you have that fear of going back behind the wheels, exposure therapy challenges us to gradually and slowly expose ourselves to that fear, okay, and do it in small stages. It may start from you saying, hey, I'm going to just sit in the driver's seat of a car that's not moving. All right. So what you may need to do is find somebody that you trust, ask them to go with you. You just go and you just sit in that car for a little bit. At first, it's going to be overwhelming because you're like, hey, I really have this fear of going back behind the driver's seat. But if you gradually expose yourself to feeling comfortable again, just sitting down in the driver's seat. The car is not moving now, but you're just sitting in the driver's seat just to expose yourself to the feeling of being in the vehicle. That is a good place to start confronting that fear of returning to the driver's seat. So you do that in small steps. You may take some time to do it on and off. So you may do it today, tomorrow you may take a break, the next day you may go back in there a few days. But find someone that you trust and just sit in the driver's seat of that vehicle. The next thing that you may want to do, I wouldn't say go driving. But after you get a little bit more comfortable sitting just there in the driver's seat, then you may move towards just turning on the vehicle and just sitting there and listening to the engine as it runs. Why you're going to do that is you're getting your mind into that space where it becomes familiar now with the sound of the engine, and where your mind gets more familiar with just sitting down in the driver's seat. As you do that, guys, what you're doing is you're exposing yourself now to the fear of doing what? Being in the driver's seat. So you go there, you sit in the driver's seat, and you seek to just expose yourself more and more to the fear of going back into the driver's seat. So day one, day two, maybe you do that for a week, 2, 3, 4 weeks. Do it as long as you start to feel comfortable again in that. The next thing that you may want to do after you have exposed yourself to that is you may want to say, hey, is it possible for me to go with someone that I trust? And this sometimes may take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, just to reintroduce that reality so your mind can sort of readjust to confronting this fear of going again behind the driver's seat. The next thing that you may want to do to confront this fear of being in the driver's seat. And we're talking about the idea of exposure therapy. That's what we're talking about, right? And as you expose yourself to that, then you may find now that you start getting a little bit more comfortable with what? Just sitting in the driver's seat. You're not driving now, all right? You're not going, no, you're just gradually getting yourself reintegrated, because the trauma that you might have had from the experience of driving, it has sort of imprinted this idea in your brain that driving is dangerous, driving is not good for you, driving is all right. And so your mind automatically allows you, it or sort of it forces you to stay in that space where you see driving as a negative thing, as a bad thing. It's because you have painful memories that are sitting there on the frontal lobe of your brain. And also the trauma of that is also right there, okay, in brainstem. And you're not able now to deal with it. But I'm saying overcoming that fear means gradually exposing yourself to that thing. And so day one, you turn the ignition, rather you sit in the driver's seat. That may continue for a while. Then you may say, hey, guess what? I'm going to just start the engine and listen. All right. Just want to reset the room to remind you that you're in tune to the XY Spark podcast. This is the podcast for men that speaks about men's mental health and how we can seek to empower and get more men to become the best version of themselves. Thank you for those who are joining us live on YouTube. We see you. We appreciate you. All right. And if you're live on YouTube and you're live on TikTok or you're live on the podcast, you can join in the conversation on any one of these platforms. If you have a question that you'd like us to address that relates to this topic about overcoming fear, please type it in the chat. We also want to say to you guys that, we appreciate all the love that you give, all the like, the share, subscribe. Please feel free to do that. And the main piece that we want to remind you guys of is that right here on the podcast, we do offer life coaching calls right here in the moment. So, as a psychotherapist and men's life coach, I'm here to say to you that, guys, if you want us to chat, if you want to come into the space, if you want to engage in a conversation, please feel free to do so right here, right now, because our goal and our aim is to normalize conversations about men's mental health. Listen, guys, going forward in 2025, I want to challenge every one of the men who are here. And I want to challenge even the women who join in. Because, yes, guys, I'm telling you, we do have also a lot of ladies who join us right here on this platform every weekday morning just to become a part of the shift that we're aiming to make as it relates to breaking the stamina of the stigma about men's mental health, normalize conversations about men's mental health, and challenge more of us as men to say, hey, we don't have to be the next person whose name is on the headline for doing something, how do I say it, that is rooted in not paying attention to or mental health and wellness. And that's what we're talking about today. So we're speaking about overcoming fear, and well, what we said earlier. Hey Lola, I see you. Michelle, I see you. Thank you, Cosmo. Join us live on TikTok. Guys, just type in the chat where you're joining us from. We just want to acknowledge you and send a shout out to you. All right, guys. So it's not anything that we're going to be like, hey, no. We just want to say, hey, shout out to you. If you're joining us live on YouTube, please, where you're joining us from, just type in the chat. We would love to just say, hey, shout out to you as well. And that's what we're here to do. We are here to say, listen, this is your community. This is a safe space. We can chat about our mental health here. I'm okay to talk about my own mental health, guys, because I too I've had my experience. I have been on that journey. You know, the reality is, guys, I can tell you this that I did not just get up one day and say, hey, I'm going to, be a life coach and I'm going to do psychotherapy. My journey dealing with my mental health, it was really, how do I say it? It was almost as if my mental health needed attention, but I did not know that it did. Right? As a man, my journey, guys, in in understanding the reality about what is mental health and how do I know when my mental health needs attention, you know, it's been so complex. And I'm here to say to more men that sometimes, guys, the reason why we are not attending to our mental health is because some of us, we really don't know that our mental health is in trouble. And some of us know that it is in trouble, but the fear of acknowledging that prevents us from doing anything about it, right? And what I'm saying to you guys is this, is that it's one thing for us to not know that our mental health is out of sync. It's another thing to know and not do anything about it. All right. I'm that guy who I did not know. I wasn't even able to acknowledge that my mental health needed attention. And here's why. I wasn't able to acknowledge it because I did not even know that there was such a thing as mental health, or even I did not know there was such a thing as me being a man, being strong. Can I put it this way? I'm a strong young man. I'm tough. So I should be immune to any form of mental health taking over my life. And I learned and recognized that my mental health needed attention after several years myself of being in so many different traumatic places in my life. And one of the big fears that I had to confront as a young man, and I want to say it this way, guys, and I'm saying this, with all respect and love for you, as a Afro American man who was born in the Caribbean, many of us were not allowed to even acknowledge that we have a mental health issue because it did not seem like something that existed, right? So being aggressive in nature, right? Being not the guy who is quick to speak, being the guy who is not able to reason, to rationalize, being that guy who was taught and who believed that the easiest way to solve an issue oftentimes is to have that physical battle, right? Without realizing that maybe my mental health needed some CPR. So I've had to learn how to do this as a black man, as an Afro American man. I've had to learn how to acknowledge and address my own mental health. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know, anything about you. I don't know your race, your ethnicity. I don't know what your belief system looks like as it relates to your mental health. I'm telling you that as a man, as an Afro American man, my belief, my cultural belief, did not allow me to acknowledge that my mental health needed attention. Now, as a man in 2025, whatever your cultural orientation is, does it make room for you to acknowledge that you have a mental health issue that needed attention? And guys, this is one of the big hurdles that we've got to learn how to get over as men. We've got to learn to get over the cultural fear that forbids us from accepting or acknowledging that our mental health is out of sync. When we look in the news, we see sometimes some really horrific things that happen, right? Because men are not paying attention to their mental health. And we have seen that, guys, from in every level of society. We have seen men who are CEOs, we have seen celebrities, we have seen athletes, we have seen lawyers, we have seen so many different men from so many different areas in society who have really not taken the time to recognize that their mental health needed attention. And because of this lack of recognizing it or not acknowledging that um, our mental health is out of sync, we end up sometimes harming ourselves. We harm, our relationships. We harm our careers because culture does not facilitate, or culture does not create an environment where as men we can talk about our mental health. And guys, that was my reality, and I've had to learn how to overcome that fear to deal with the reality that my mental health needed attention. So one of the number one things that we've got to learn to do as men is we've got to learn to confront the cultural about recognizing that our mental health needs attention. Because the cultural fear, guys, is a huge thing. It is a cultural fear that causes us as men to sometimes even deny the reality about what's going on with us, right? The cultural fear causes us to look through a lens of, hey, I don't want to be judged. The cultural fear causes us to look through a lens of, what will people think? The cultural fear causes us to look at, hey, what will my friends think? What will my parents think? What will my father think? The cultural fear will cause us, guys, to resort to isolating and shutting down and bottling things up. Why do you think a lot of us as men we bottle things up so much? It's because of fear. The fear that, hey, someone will find out. So we bottle that up and we keep that internally, guys. And as we do that, the more we bottle things up, is the more the fear boils up, and is the more it impacts our psychological, emotional state of well being. The cultural fear, guys, is what prevents us from sometimes even talking to or talking with some of the persons with whom we interact every day, because as men we don't talk too much about feelings and emotions and fears, because the cultural piece that is so that saturates that reality prevents us from stepping up and saying, hey, I'm really struggling with my mental health. So we want to learn more how to first challenge that cultural fear. We want to challenge the societal fear in society. Guys, it's crazy. And something as a psychotherapist, I'm privileged, and I'm going to reiterate, I am privileged sometimes when someone reaches out to me or walks into my office and say, hey, Rolando, I'm struggling with a fear. I'm struggling here with something and I need to work on it. And whatever it is, it may sometimes require for persons to take time away from their professional roles. And oftentimes when they take that time away and it's time for them to return, they have this fear of returning because what they think people are going to say about them. That's a societal fear. And guys, I want to say to all the men here, all those, even if you're not a man, you're a woman, but you're listening, and you may have had to take some time away from your professional role to take care of yourself. And it's time for you to go back. I'm saying to you, do not let societal fear prevent you from returning, because that societal fear makes us feel, hey, what will my co-workers think? What will, my boss think? No, don't feed that fear. You did what you needed to do to take care of you. And I'm saying, guys, that taking care of your mental health is your responsibility. So take the lead. Do what you need to do. Don't let societal fear prevent you from taking care of yourself. This is one of the fears that we have to deal with. So, winning the battle against that fear means, hey, stepping up and recognize and acknowledge the reality. Winning the battle against that fear is critical. So, how do you win the battle against that fear? Get up and believe in yourself again. Acknowledge your strengths. Give yourself some credit from recognizing that, hey, I am not in a good space. I need to step forward and work on myself. Be proud of your accomplishment. That's how you overcome that fear. Don't continue to tell yourself that, what will people think? I don't want anybody to judge me. I don't want to feel, I don't, my coworkers feel that I abandoned my post. No, if you were not in a good space and you took the time that you needed to work on yourself, to return and to get back in a good space, celebrate that, own that, see that as a strength. And oftentimes, guys, what I find happens is a societal pressure, especially in the workplace, sometimes make people feel, sometimes it's almost as if it wants, it makes people feel like, hey, if I take time to go work on myself, when it's time for me to return to work, I'm supposed to feel guilty for doing that. No, 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 guys, that's not something to feel guilty about. That's something for you to feel proud about. So you have to shift this belief that when you do something good and something healthy, you're supposed to feel guilty when you go back in the presence of sometimes other men. Guys, I'm going to say to you, sometimes you go and you do the work to get healthy so that you can return to work and do a better job. And when it's time for you to return to work, you're going back to work and you're feeling guilty as if you did something wrong. No, you did not do anything wrong. You did something good, and you should be proud of yourself for doing that. Own that success. Don't let the fear of guilt overshadow the reality of your success, the reality of your achievement. So that's what you need to do to overcome that fear. All right. The next thing, guys, that we want to understand is this. Oftentimes, it is fear that is the underlying factor that fuels anxiety. Right? Did you know that? Did you know that? Yes, guys. Fear is one of the major causes of anxiety. So if you are someone that you find that you're overly anxious all the time, it's because of fear, that fear. Yeah, and understanding too, guys, how the fear is sort of impacting you is a good place to start confronting the anxiety. Hey, I see you, MS Munch. Thank you for joining. Just type in the chat where you're joining us from. We appreciate you. Shout out. Just to reset the room and say you are in tune to the XY Spark podcast. This is the podcast for men where we seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. Our goal and our aim in 2025 and beyond is to seek to create a safe space where men can talk about their mental health and not feel ashamed or afraid to talk about it. Guys, we are saying that we have got to normalize these conversations about men's mental health. Why? Because mental health is not a myth. And I'm going to say this to you, men. You and I, we are not immune to being impacted by mental health. But as we learn how to win the battle against the fear of mental health, guys, this is how we will become more savvy. This is become we become more grounded. This is how, guys, and I'm going to name call here. This is how we will become healthier men. So we are talking about breaking the stamina of the stigma about men's mental health, right? So let's continue to talk about anxiety and dealing with anxiety because, yes, guys, one of the major underlying causes of anxiety is fear, right? And this fear sometimes, guys, it is being fed by a futuristic way of thinking, right? When we get into this space where our mindset is futuristic, the anxiety continues to overwhelm us and we stop living. We're not motivated, we're not driven, we're not going at it because the fear that we have is futuristic. We fear that, hey, if I do it, it's not going to work out. And sometimes, guys, those fear factors have to do with what we call we have what we call futuristic thinking. We get into several different forms of thinking patterns that impacts our mental health. So we want to learn now how to win the battle against the fear, how to confront the anxiety, right? We get sometimes into fear causes us to be more fortune telling. It's almost as if the fear cripples us because we become futuristic thinkers, and the fear causes us now, guys, to go through panic attacks, right? Have you experienced any panic as a man, as a female, you might be listening, do you find that sometimes you experience some panic attack? Yes, guys, that panic attack is rooted in fear, where we have futuristic thinking, we get into black or white thinking, we get into this all or nothing. All right. Sometimes we go get into some emotional thinking where we create chaos. We live our lives in that sort of boxed in because hey, I am feeling so fearful. So but we want to really look at winning the battle against that fear by first pinpointing the reality of that fear. Okay, so I'm feeling fearful, I'm feeling some anxiety. Where in my body do I feel the tension the most? When you feel some anxiety going on in there, where in your body do you carry that? Is it in your chest? Is it in your stomach? Do you feel it in your shoulders? Is it in your head? How has the fear been a crippling um, effect in your life? What has the fear done? And so we want to talk about how do we control these triggers when we experience fear. So guys, we want to really make it clear that anxiety is one of those things that's grounded in fear. So we want to ask ourselves why, what, and how. Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling about this event that is going to happen? Notice I said going to. So fear sometimes, guys, get us into that space in our mind where we become futuristic thinkers, we become black or white thinkers, and oftentimes this is based on the fear that we've created in our own minds. So we want to ask ourselves practical questions to deal with the fear. For example, a question that we want to ask ourselves when you feel anxious is, okay, am I assuming a threat when there is none? Right? That's big step, big question. Am I assuming a threat when there where there is none? Number two is this fear based on facts or opinion? All right. So you want to zone in on that. Is this fear, is it based on facts or opinion? All right. Is this fear based on an interpretation of an event, or is it based on facts? We're talking about overcoming the fear of anxiety, right? I see you, God out there. I see you, Keegan. Just want to say shout out to you guys. Shout out to all our live viewers who are live on YouTube. Shout out to those who are live here on the podcast. You're in tune to XY Spot, the podcast for men, where we seek to normalize conversations about men's mental health. And if you're joining us, please keep those likes, those comments coming. Invite somebody to join in our conversation as we seek to break the stamina of the stigma about men's mental health. So we were talking about overcoming the fear of anxiety. So you ask those questions: am I interpreting a threat where there is none? All right. Am I fortune telling? Am I making any assumptions? Are my interpretations lining up with the event? And we want to see, guys, to ask all these questions when we start feeling the anxiety sort of overriding us. Why we ask those questions? It helps us to reset in reality. It helps us, guys, to be more attentive to the thoughts that we're having, because remember, the anxiety is fueled from a thought that we sometimes create out of our own fear about the future. So if we're able to confront that fear, challenge that fear, we have got to start with challenging the thought itself that is fueling that fear, and we challenge it by asking those questions. And then, guys, what we need to do is sort of see now, to take a step back and look at, okay, what are the facts here? What is reality? And confronting it and pinpointing what reality is in the moment is going to now bring you back now to stay grounded and stay connected with, hey, okay, this is the fact. The fact is that I'm having some fear of what I think is going to happen, but it has not happened. I'm having some fear about, the way I think things may go. It could be the relationship. You might have started a new relationship and you have the fear that maybe this relationship is not going to work out. Maybe this person thinks I'm not good enough. Sometimes you have that fear where you're trying to overcompensate. You've got to sort of step back from that and slow it down a little bit, because sometimes, guys, I can tell this overcompensation sometimes can make a lot of us as men come across as being too clingy, and sometimes that is a turn off for some partners that you may connect with. So you want to step back and say, hey, am I overcompensating because of fear? You may need to step back and be more balanced. I might experience anxiety because the fear of the future. I've got to step back and acknowledge that, hey, guess what? I have no capacity to control the future, but I possess the capacity to control what is happening in the here and now. So overcoming the fear against anxiety, guys, is going to bring you to that space now where you are better able to live in the here and the now, Ground yourself in the present. And as you learn how to do that, you become better and better at managing the fear that you have. And you'll be able to manage better the anxiety that you have. And, the next piece, guys, is, when you identify where you're carrying this knot in your chest, in your stomach, in your shoulders, in your head, taking the time to do some mindful breathing, taking the time to really, zone in on where you're carrying this tension, this overwhelming feeling that is a crippling impact in your life, then that's when, guys, you're going to be able to control your reactions to the fear. So, winning the battle against fear, it starts here, guys, but it also needs to have the follow through, the consistency, because what we're talking about here is not putting on a band-aid on it. We're talking about working at it until you get it. We're talking about exposing yourself to it. We're talking about doing the practice, doing the work, the mental, the psychological work in confronting the fear so that you can become more in tune and more in control of the anxiety, right? And remember, we said it, that anxiety itself is fueled from fear. As you go off into the new year, I just need to challenge you a little bit about becoming more intentional with working on confronting your fears. I every day have to work on confronting my fears, right? And doing it, guys, it's a healthy and very fulfilling thing to know that, hey, I am consistently working on overcoming and managing the fear, right? If you have that fear in your relationships, you want to ask yourself, why do I have this fear? Am I fearful because I feel that I'm not good enough for this person? Am I fearful because, I don't want this person to, learn about my past. So I'm very, very, cautious about what I say, how I say, when I say, what is your relationship fear, right? And if you're joining us here on the podcast, if you're live on TikTok or on YouTube or on the podcast, you can just type in the chat, what is your relationship fear? What do you fear the most in your relationship? One person said to me one time, Ron, the greatest fear I have is that, my partner is going to cheat on me. And a lot of guys, a lot of persons have that fear. But if that's a fear that you have in your relationship, I want you to sort of take a step back and ask yourself this question. The question is this: is if my partner decides to cheat on me, is that my fault or theirs? Is it that I did something wrong or they did? Is it that, I've not been stepping up as much as I should as a man? So, that's what you get for not doing that. So it's really being mindful about that. And also understanding too that, hey, sometimes, you may be in a relationship with someone who they do not understand the value of being in a committed relationship. Right, that's why they talk about, guys, some persons who they may be serial cheaters. It's hard for them to settle down, and if you recognize that that's the relationship that you're in, then you may want to seek to do something about overcoming that fear. And overcoming that fear means acknowledging what the reality is, because there's reality in relationships and there are expectations. And if your expectations are not aligned with reality, then how do you expect that relationship to work out? So if you have that fear in your relationship, then you want to seek to sort of answer those questions. So yes, if my greatest fear in a relationship is that, hey, my partner, is going to cheat on me, then you may want to sort of look at, okay, if That is my fear. Why do I have that fear? Is that because of my own insecurities? Is that because of my lack of stepping up and bringing the best version of myself to the relationship? Why do I have that fear? Is it because this relationship started from the based on the foundation that I was the side guy, and now this person is with me? And what makes it different for you? What is going to prevent you from being cheated on if that's how you started that relationship? So the fear that you have about cheating your partner, cheating on you in a relationship, that fear oftentimes may be because of your own insecurity. And if that's where you're at, and if that's what's generating that fear, then as a man, you need to go work on your insecurity. You need to find yourself first before you think about being in a relationship with somebody else if your greatest fear is that your partner cheats on you. Because remember, at the end of the day, you have got to also be very, very aware and very mindful that if your fear is being fueled from your own lack of self worth and self fulfillment and personal wellness, then you've got to work on that. But don't let that fear become something that fuels your behavior in your relationship, right? And that's what I'm saying. What other fears do you have? You may have a fear of, hey, the economy is in chaos now. My fear is, hey, I may lose my job. Now, that's something oftentimes, guys, that you do not have control over. If you spend time focusing on that fear, it brings on a lot of anxiety, and it impacts your production, your ability to produce. So what you've got to do is go and put your best foot forward. And if worst case scenario that ends up being um, your plight, you get laid off from a job that you were in for many years. That's not something that you could do anything about. The truth of the matter is, you may get up out of bed every day and you go to work and you do your best. That's what you're supposed to do. Right? That's what you're supposed to do if you are not your own boss. And if you're your own boss, guess what? I guarantee you're going to go there and do your best. But if you are employed by somebody else, it's a part of your responsibility to do the best job that you can do, because that's why you were hired. So going out there half-heartedly is depriving you and the person that you work with of experiencing the best success possible. So I'm saying that following through and ruminating on that fear of losing of losing your job, guys, is going to prevent you now from the following things. Number one, is going to prevent you from staying grounded. Number two, is going to impact your ability to to be marketable. Is going to even impact your ability to produce in the role that you're in. So I'm saying that feeding that fear of not being employed is a detrimental thing as it relates to celebrating and owning your wins and seeing your successes as important and as valuable. So guys, overcoming the fear of that means stepping up every single day and saying to yourself, hey, you know what, no matter what, I'm going to continue to put my best foot forward. Dealing with that now, guys, means taking the time to work on and care for yourself, whereby you'll be more effective and more efficient. Guys, I'm saying this: winning the battle against fear is something that requires us to be consistent, to be intentional, and to work on ourselves, you know, more and more, and make it a lifestyle commitment. That's how we overcome fear. That's how we win the battle against fear. Number one, acknowledge it. Stop pretending that it's not there. Number two, confront it, right? Number three, guys, as you confront it, seek to find healthy solutions to address it. Because as men, oftentimes when we get into that space, where we're experiencing fear, we don't confront it with healthy decisions. We try to do it, guys, in aggressive ways. We deny that it's there. But I'm saying acknowledge it, confront it, communicate with somebody who is able to help you to work through it, right? And then, guys, you have got to be willing to do the work. And I'm not saying doing the work temporarily. I'm saying when you confront that fear and you find that you start doing the work, make it a lifestyle change. Why, guys? Because personal development is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And if you're going to win the battle against fear, you've got to be considerate. You've got to consider, rather, making a lifestyle change, right? So that you can be more attuned with your thoughts. Remember, mindset makes a man or breaks a man. And so, as you create a new perspective and your thinking pattern changes and your mindset changes, then you will get into a healthier space and your battle against fear becomes easier. The anxiety that you're experiencing now becomes less and less and less. The panic attack, they start to lessen because now you're learning more now how to become the architect of your thoughts. You're learning how to create new perspectives. You're learning how to look through not a lens whereby you're wearing visors and you're just looking at life or looking at events one way. You're learning now how to carefully scrutinize every thought and you're bringing things back into perspectives. You're grounding yourself in your reality and you're taking the lead. You're taking ownership of the things that you can do or the things that you need to do in order to become the best version of yourself. So, winning the battle against fear, guys, you've got to be very, very direct, you've got to be very intentional, you've got to be brutally honest with yourself, you've got to connect with healthy supports, you've got to see to talk to somebody that you trust, you've got to see to get out of your comfort zone and engage in personal growth and development. You've got to set some goals for yourself and you have got to make it a habit. And the more you do it, guys, you'll start liking it more and more. And as you work against confronting your fears, then your mindset will become different. What we're talking about, guys, is remembering that mindset makes you or mindset breaks you. So, creating that perspective where you are training your mind, you're training your brain to think differently, to act differently, then you'll be in a healthier place and the anxiety will slowly start to lessen. You see, the reality is this, guys, is that we will all experience some anxiety, but what we've got to remember is this, is when the anxiety gets to that place where it's controlling our lives and preventing us from living our best lives, that's when it becomes unhealthy. That's when it becomes harmful. But as we learn how to live with the anxiety and control the way we react to it and be able to pinpoint the anxiety when it shows up, it will help us now to manage or reactions to the anxiety in more effective ways. And as we do that, guys, we become healthier and we become more effective and more efficient. Hey, Noah, I see you. Thank you, Noah, for joining us here live on the podcast. Happy New Year. Guys, just type in the chat where you're joining us from. Shout out to those who are joining us live on YouTube. Thank you for being here. Where are you joining us from? Please type in the chat. We just want to acknowledge you and say, hey, it's great to have you here joining us live on the podcast. If you want to continue to listen or hear more of our episodes, please you can subscribe to our podcast. It's at xyspark.podbean.com. For all my TikTok followers, I'm going to make sure I tap that in the information so you can click on that link and go like, share, subscribe, and comment to our podcast. Guys, also want to say, please keep those downloads going. Please keep those likes coming. Please keep those comments coming because our goal for 2025 is we want to get to 10,000 viewers. Okay, want to get to 10,000 listeners, want to get to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. So we value your feedback, and if you have something that you'd like us to discuss, we would like you to just type it in the chat. You can message us on the back end of our YouTube channel, of our podcast, of our TikTok, and we will seek to have more of those conversations. We are here on the podcast at XY Spark weekday mornings between the hours of 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. If you are in Canada, you know that Mountain Standard Time will find you in places like Alberta, but then there are those who are on Eastern Standard Time, which is like 2 hours ahead of us here on Mountain, or you may be on Pacific, or you may be in Australia or Europe. I'm not sure where you are listening from. You may be down there in Asia, wherever you are. We appreciate you. Just type in the chat where you are joining us from so that we can send a shout out. Keep those likes, keep those comments, keep sharing because you are the ones that make our podcast as effective and efficient as it is humanly possible. Guys, we're almost at the end of our show today. But just before we wrap up our show, I don't know, do you have a question? Do you have a comment? If this content today you find that it was helpful for you, I would like to hear from you. I'd like to hear from you, TikTok. I'd like to hear from you, YouTube. I'd like to hear from you right here on the podcast at xyspot.podbean. You can go back and listen to our full episodes later. You can download it on Apple. You can see it on Spotify. We're also on iHeartRadio and Amazon. You can find our full episodes there. And guys, please, please, please let us know what you think about our podcast today. In the meantime, we will see you guys again tomorrow morning. Join us again tomorrow morning. Today, our topic was how to win the battle against fear. It's Willpower Wednesday. Go out there today, guys. And remember, trust yourself and challenge yourself and set some goals for yourself. Why? Because personal development is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And we here at XY Spark, we just want to remind you that we believe that there is a spark in you. We will see you again next time for another beautiful episode of the XY Spark podcast.